compared to the show of designs that BMW are giving us now, this is actually kind of conservative.
Here's a question for you. Mechanically speaking, why couldn't BMW continue to make engines like these that are reliable, relatively easy to work on, and the parts are affordable?
What are these things like to drive these days? 2 words: massively underrated. Okay, could this be not only one of the most underrated BMWs of all time, but possibly even one of the most underrated performance cars that money can buy? It has all the hallmarks of a classic 2-seat roadster or coupe. Punchy engine up front, sending power to the rear wheels, all wrapped in a compact and stylish body. And thanks to some serious depreciation, the Z4 can be all yours for a very affordable price. But should you actually buy one of these? Are they actually worth the risk? Like, what goes wrong with them? How about we start with the exterior? Well, first up, and look, this is really well documented, and actually if you do need more detailed information on this, go and check out the owners groups in the forums, there's loads of advice. But the first big problem are the bloody motors for the powered roof. See, for some unknown reason, BMW situated the electric motors for the roof in a position where they're incredibly susceptible to get wet if the drainage channels for the roof are blocked. And I don't know if you know this, but electricity and water, they don't mix. Now, there are people out there that can revive these broken or ruined motors, and there are some other band-aid solutions, but the hot tip here is to relocate the motors into the boot so they're out of harm's way. Now, to do this actually isn't that hard. There are plenty of great tutorials on YouTube, check them out. Or the other option that plenty of owners do is just bin the electronics altogether and turn it into a manually operated roof. That'll solve the problem. And while we're on the topic of drainage channels, just like pretty much every convertible since the dawn of time, you gotta make sure these drainage channels and holes are kept clean and clear. Specifically on the Z4, make sure the drainage channels above the rear wheels are kept clear, because if not, you can get water ingress into the cabin, and that can create all sorts of electronic dramas. And obviously the hardtop coupe Z4 avoids these concerns, but then you won't get the sensation of wind rapidly rushing through your hair. Now, next up, and this actually goes for both the hard and the soft tops, make sure that anything on the exterior that's powered by electricity actually works. We're talking about windscreen wipers, powered mirrors, door locks, lighting. Check it all. If these don't work, or they just work sporadically, it could be an issue with the car's GM5 module. Now, the hot tip from the owners groups in the forums on these modules is don't go to your BMW dealership to get it sorted, because they're going to try to charge you a small fortune. Instead, make sure you check out the forums. For example, z4forum.com or e46fanatics.com, because these modules, they can be repaired or even replaced. Although if you do replace them, it might have to be recoded. That can be a little bit of a faff. Just check the forums. Also, with the age of this car, the window regulators might have seen better days. So if the glass is having an issue with coming up, it might be that. But besides the potential electronic dramas, there are also some potential mechanical issues with the exterior that you need to be aware of. For example, a stretched Bowden cable in the door can stop the door from opening, as can a worn door handle mechanism. A stretched cable or even a lack of lube on the cable can stop the bonnet from opening. Also, on the topic of the bonnet, just make sure that all the panel gaps are accurate, because the hinge joints can be a bit of a weak point, and realigning it can be apparently a bloody nightmare. Now, while we're down here, like plenty of cars of this era, the headlights can yellow. That is easily fixed. However, owners of these that have the halogen headlights claim that the torch on their phone actually does a better job at lighting the road ahead. So therefore, if you're planning on driving one of these at night, try to find an example with the xenon headlights instead. They might be easier to find on the post-2006 cars, because the update included extra features and equipment. Not to mention all of the usual design enhancements, plus for the Australian market, the model designations changed thanks to engine upgrades. Now, Jim, our resident mechanic, will expand on the engines and their common issues in a second, but as an overview, the post-update power plants produced more power, delivered better fuel economy, and the 6-speed auto with the paddle shifts replaced the old 5-speed. But I know what you're thinking, that isn't the entire Z4 range, is it? Well, no, you're right. It's not. We also received Z4s wearing coveted M badges, and they come with all the bells and whistles that you'd expect. Performance-tuned suspension and brakes, extra features and equipment, subtle body enhancements, hydraulically assisted steering instead of the electric like the normal Z4. But most notably, the M models are powered by the iconic S54 3.2. And they are substantially more affordable than their E46 M3 counterparts. And that's interesting because this generation of Z4 shares a whole host of mechanical components with the E46 3 Series, and that can mean really good news when it comes to accessing spare parts and what they cost. Also, fun fact for you as well, if you're tempted to buy one of these over, say, one of the more obvious alternatives, the Mazda MX-5, because being a BMW, it has the whole European image thing going on, these weren't made in Europe. These were actually made in South Carolina. But while we're mentioning the MX-5, it does seem appropriate to talk about depreciation and what a Z4 is going to cost you these days. Now, pricing currently on the Aussie used market ranges from about $10,000 to $40,000 for the non-M models. Most of them sit around about $20,000. Interestingly though, the hard tops, they do ask a premium over the soft top. But let's say you've got about $20,000 to spend. Well, that should buy you a really good condition post-update 3 litre. But you got to remember, that was a car that was asking around about $100,000 when brand new. But as a comparison, you know what else you could buy for about $20,000? A pretty good condition 2007 Mazda MX-5. The thing is, when it was brand new, it was asking about $45,000, less than half of this. A Z4 is absolutely going to trounce an MX-5 when it comes to its power to weight ratio and acceleration times. And remember, it's a $100,000 car, and yeah, you can tell. Actually, this is something I personally love about the Z4. It's just the looks and the overall vibe of the thing. Design-wise, check this line out. It just goes all the way down here, then accentuates this rear arch. I love it. I know Chris Bengal copped a lot of flack when he was designing these back in the day, but I feel like they've just aged beautifully. I think that the reason the design works now is that it's getting old enough to be almost retro cool. And it's interesting because even though these were controversial when they first came out, compared to the shit show of designs that BMW are giving us now, this is actually kind of conservative. Now, just back to what these are going to cost you in terms of ownership, and we see this with a bunch of premium brands, what BMW will try to charge you for replacement wiper blades is ridiculous. But we have a solution. To save some money on some of the best wiper blades on the market, and they seriously are, we do use them on all of our cars, hit the Wipertech link below. They're a great Aussie company. We've been working with them for a couple of years now, and the feedback we get about the entire process from ordering to fitting to actually using them is just outstanding. If you want to set, hit the link below, unless you own this car and your name is Dean, because you'll be going home with a free set of these bad boys. Okay, when it comes to common complaints and issues inside, do us a favor and push every single button and just make sure it works. And look, chances are it's going to, but owners have reported a host of different various electrical gremlins, everything from the air conditioning playing up, and that can be bloody expensive to fix, through to infotainment system issues. But checking every button shouldn't take you too long because there actually aren't that many buttons in here. However, some of the other electronics can also have some issues. Things like the seat occupancy sensor can fail up, and that can be a bloody nightmare. Also, the airbag sensor, it can play up, but it's also really susceptible to liquid. So if you've got a coffee, just be careful that you don't spill it. Also on that airbag sensor, they're bloody expensive to replace. We've read quotes in excess of $1,000 to replace it. So yeah, just be careful with it. Next up, a few owners have had some issues with the door handles, just getting stuck and they won't open the door. Even this one, it does require a bit of encouragement to open it. Sometimes a bit of lube can fix this up. Other times, owners require a whole new door handle assembly. A worn handbrake mechanism seems to be a pretty common fault. And again, jump on the owners groups and forums to see how to sort this one out. Actually, just on the owners groups and forums, what an awesome bunch of humans. If you're in the market for one of these, do what we do and join the forums and owners groups to do the research, because their advice and knowledge is just priceless. However, plenty of them complained about just how shit the cup holders in this thing is. Now, I don't know about that. See, I'm a pretentious wanker, so therefore I drink pretentious wanker coffees like piccolos and espressos and double ristretto, stuff like that. And I think for my coffees, because the little platform at the bottom flips down and then the little arm can be adjusted in, that holds a proper coffee properly. I gather that if you're the sort of person that drinks really huge coffees, like a bucket of coffee, which is actually a dessert, then that won't fit properly. And also, okay, yeah, they do feel a little bit on the flimsy side, and being old brittle plastic, it could possibly break. But for me, in this car, they're great. Actually, just on the whole aging plastic thing, that is a big complaint with these interiors, that the entire interior can get really rattled because a lot of the plastics, they get brittle over time. Now, our mates at Throttle House had an issue with this because they, on their video, couldn't actually open this section, which opens quite easily, but even in this car, it's clearly broken at the bottom. expect rattles and creaks and weird noises. Actually, just on the whole practicality thing, obviously you've got your 2 cup holders there. You've also got, I think that's a cigarette lighter and an ashtray. Disappointing. That's there. You've got a spot here that is specifically designed to collect all the filth and dust and crap from outside as quickly as possible. I think this is for your keys, even though it doesn't have push button start, so that's going to be a challenge. It does have door pockets, but they're very, very narrow. The part the Throttle House boys had issues with is this. Now, this is cool, but you've got a spot specifically designed for a pen there. You've got, I don't know what that's for, maybe the cigarettes. Gross. Also, these storage bins, they're actually quite deep. That's where your CD changer and stuff is. There's something under here, but for us that isn't opening. I don't actually know what that does as such. I think that's it. Oh, sorry, I forgot. There's a net down here. We're pretty sure that's for spare shoelaces. Maybe if you go fishing in this and you need a spot for a very small carp, that could be where you store it. Also, it does have map pockets on the backs of the seats for an emergency. You just have to wait and wait and wait and wait. And then map pockets on the backs of the seats. Just got to hope that your hand has one dimension. Look, overall, I think that's pretty good practicality for a 2-seat roadster. And while we're talking positives, let's talk about the design of this thing. What I love is that the interior and the exterior are clearly the same design language. We even had a shot before, I don't know if you noticed in some of the B-roll, but when you look across the car through what would normally be the window, the way the dashboard lines up with the lines of the actual side of the bodywork is just beautiful. It's simplistic. I absolutely adore the interior design in here. Also, it's not form over function. Like, the actual ergonomics are really, really spot on. Everything's easy to get to. These seats are good. They're not great. But as I mentioned before, because this shares so much with the E46 platform, you can swap in like M Sport seats out of an M3 or, M equipped 3 Series into this. It can be a bolt-in plug-and-play situation. Also, on the topic of the seats and overall ergonomics, thanks to musician and producer Z4 being 14 centimeters shorter than me, the overall feel in here, it feels a lot larger than an MX-5. It just feels like they've thought this accommodation out more than the Mazda, to the point that some really tall owners claimed they had to buy a Z4 because it was the only 2-seat rear-wheel drive roadster that they could actually fit comfortably in with the roof up. However, as wonderful as this interior is to look at and use and just be in general, quite a few owners complain that the interior resilience isn't fantastic. Even in this car, some of the leather's getting pretty loosey-goosey and it just doesn't age that well. The leather requires fastidious maintenance and care to look its best. And yeah, it doesn't age that well in terms of like resilience and wear and tear. Now, as far as what features and equipment that you can expect in here, look, these were around about $100,000 new, so obviously it's going to have a pretty decent range of stuff. Also, if you go up to the 3-litre engine, it gets a few more features. And that 2006 update, it also includes Bluetooth for the infotainment system, although this can raise some issues. See, the standard infotainment system, understandably, is getting really long in the tooth these days, so the Bluetooth can be patchy at best, and obviously you can forget about any modern technology like a rear view camera or Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, anything like that. However, the good news is retrofitting that technology is really, really simple. Our tip is to go and visit our mates at Automotive Superstore. All you've got to do is type in your car's rego and it will display all the parts that are specifically suited for your car. And we're not just talking infotainment stuff either. Automotive Superstore carry everything from car care products, performance suspension parts, full drive accessories, car care, you name it, they've got it. Plus, they will ship straight to your door, so the entire process is incredibly convenient. Check them out via the link below. And then as far as practicality in the boot goes, you know what? Actually pretty good. This is substantially larger than the boot of an MX-5, and honestly, bigger than the boot of a lot of 2-seat roadsters. I'm genuinely impressed. I wasn't expecting to have this much space. And then when it comes to complaints and issues with the driving experience, as we mentioned before, you can expect a few rattles and weird sounds from the brittle plastics inside, but also listen for any weird sounds coming from the suspension. These can have a bit of a reputation for the rear springs cracking and even failing, the rear strut mounts getting pretty unhappy, and even the front control arms and ball joints having a few issues. But the good news with all of this is that quality aftermarket parts are pretty easy to come by and they shouldn't cost you a fortune. Also, the electronic power assisted steering that you might assume is going to be bloody terrible because it's one of the earlier EPAS systems, it's actually really, really good. It can be super sensitive to wheel alignment, tyre pressure, and even tyre choice. Just make sure you check out the owners groups and forums on recommendations on what premium performance rubber to fit, because it can vary depending on your location, how much you've got to spend, and what you want to do with your Z4. But look, besides the common complaints and potential issues with the driving experience, what are these things like to drive these days? 2 words: massively underrated. This thing feels like driving a 3rd generation Mazda MX-5 that has just spent a copious amount of time in the gym. It just feels bigger and more powerful and just stronger in every way. Okay, look, it might not have the light on its feet, just blatant, hilarious, fun aspects of an MX-5, but it's sort of swapped that for this feeling of sort of conviction and just like seriousness. Don't get me wrong, this thing will still make you laugh out loud. It's just more of a laughing like a psychopath, whereas the MX-5 is just kind of you giggle to your heart's content. Even when you distill it down to its core ingredients, they are all so good. This manual gear shift, why can't BMW get this right anymore? The new ones, they're like overly assisted or a bit too notchy or a bit too soggy. This thing's just fantastic. Not like S2000 levels, but bloody good. Steering, as I said, great. Ride quality, great. This engine, so smooth, and it encourages you to want to rev it out. And it's not so fast that you're going to lose your license. It's just fantastic. Now, corner coming up, handling, tip it into this corner. Oh man, like there's communication there. This is so good. And even when you're not giving it the beans on some deserted mountain pass like this, for the daily duties, it just does a really good job. It's refined, relatively refined besides the plastic rattling, and it's easy to live with. It's small. The big and most important thing, but this seems to avoid a lot of the negative attention that other convertibles can get. I've been driving this around a bit and no one's yelled out that I'm a wanker yet. But as wonderful as this is to drive, there might be another negative, and that is mechanically what can go wrong with them. Unfortunately, I can't tell you about that because I'm not a qualified mechanic, but Jim is.
Now we're going to do this in chronological order, so we're going to start with the M series first, the M54. Now, like all engines, these do have water pump complications and thermostat complications too. Now the water pump in these look relatively cheap and easy. The thing to watch out for though is making sure you get one with a metal impeller. The BMW ones have a plastic impeller, and this is just another case where non-genuine parts are quite often not only cheaper but better than the factory ones. Now the DISA valve in these, now I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce that how it is pronounced, but this is what it sounds like.
Differenzierte Sauganlage.
Yeah, that bit. That's basically an actuator that sits in the inlet manifold that changes the length of the inlet tract from short to long depending on power and torque that's required at any given time. Now that valve is mostly made of plastic and quite often it just gets stuck or doesn't work at all, or in some cases the parts can come off the valve and get sucked into the manifold and end up in the engine, which is bad. The good news here is the valve is relatively cheap to change and you can actually buy upgraded versions that are much better. So yeah, definitely something to look out for. And what you're looking out for is you might hear a rattle sometimes. You also might find that you're a bit low on power or torque, or your fuel economy might have gone out the window, and you might be getting some air-fuel ratio fault codes as well. The Vanos solenoids, there's 2 of those in these, they often play up. Now in some cases you can clean them out, but it rarely works. Given the price of them, which is a couple $100, just replace them. The PCV valve on these, it's old school, it's just a diaphragm and a plastic housing and a few pipe connectors. You can buy the whole kit for $150 in most cases. Relatively easy to change. You'll know you've got a problem there. Sometimes you hear it sucking, other times you're just logging air fuel related fault codes. Now onto the N series engines. Now a lot of what I just said about the M series carries over to these as well. Now a fun fact about the N series engines, these are the last engines BMW made that you could get with no turbo. And some say that they are actually some of the most reliable engines BMW have made too. Yeah, and I actually would agree with that. They're pretty good. Now the N-Series engines use an electric pump. It's quite a big bulky unit. It's not like the old M-Series engines. They are prone to failure as well. They are somewhat more expensive than the old belt-driven water pump. you can expect to pay for a good one up to $1,000 in some cases. Just keep an eye on that, because sometimes they can not work and you can get some overheating issues. Other times they can get a short circuit inside and keep running well after the car has been turned off and just flatten your battery. So yeah, something to look out for there. The Valvetronic motors in these, they are also sometimes problematic. Again, they are actually also pretty cheap to buy and relatively easy to fit too. And the same goes for the Vanos solenoids. If you're getting any issues with those, just replace them. Don't worry about cleaning them, just put new ones in it. Because the problem with those Vanos solenoids is they just get a lot of gunk and oil residue in them. Sometimes they get a switching issue as well, so it's not really worth your trouble. Just put a new set in. The earlier versions of these engines can have some issues with their hydraulic lifters. Basically just the way they're designed, they don't really get enough oil supply up there, and they can just start tapping a little bit and making a tappet noise basically. Now you can spend a whole bunch of money fixing it, but quite often most people just put up with it because it doesn't really make a great difference to the power or economy for that matter. Yes, oil leaks, these do leak from the valve cover gasket and the oil filter housing, and the sump gasket on these can leak as well. Now that's a bit of a pain if the sump gasket leaks, but it's more often the valve cover and the oil filter housing. Now needless to say, the age of these things, all the cooling system components that are made of plastic are probably going to be on their last legs. The good news here, you can buy a complete hose kit for one of these things for like a few $100, and they're all pretty easy to change too. And all the rest of the cooling system, like the radiator, again, keep an eye on the plastic tanks and the expansion tank as well on these things. They are prone to leaking as well. The good news here is there's a pretty good community around these engines. The parts are relatively cheap and they're pretty easy to work on as well. So from a do-it-yourself point of view, they're actually pretty good. Now I know we bang on about this all the time, and this is a good example. Before you buy any parts, just check out what is available from the aftermarket scene. Now the S54 engine, look, it is a very different engine and it's got its own set of issues. Now, we're going to leave that for today, but we are going to do it when we do the E46 M3. It is coming, I promise.
But here's a question for you. For this sort of money, besides the Z4 and the obvious alternative, the Mazda MX-5, what other two-seat rear-wheel drive roadsters can you buy? Well, you could potentially have the MX-5's Italian cousin, the Abarth 124 Spider, or the other iconic Japanese roadster, the Honda S2000. What about maybe the Z4's arch nemesis, the Mercedes-Benz SLK, possibly even in V8-powered SLK 55 trim? Or maybe another German, but this time mid-engined, the original Porsche Boxster. But we argue, bang for your buck, the Z4 is incredibly hard to beat, especially when it's got a 3-litre engine. Obviously, this isn't a car for the faint-hearted. If you want bulletproof reliability and an ease of ownership experience that's in line with the Toyota Camry, just buy an MX-5. But if you're willing to invest the time, effort and money into a genuine enthusiast's car, the Z4 needs to be at the very pointy end of your list. However, for this sort of money, there's another two-seat roadster that we would highly recommend checking out. Plus, it's going to cost you way less in terms of fuel and consumables like tyres, and it is easily as much fun and possibly even more unique than this. It's one of these. But I've got a question for you. If you weren't to buy this or this, what other two-seat roadster would you buy? Let us know in the comments. See you next time. Sticking, even in this car, bikes. They're good bikes. They're slowing down. Now why they're good bikes? Because they're not Harley Davidsons.